A big thank you to Jero for sponsoring today's video on Patreon. Hello all, going to be going over to Moxfield and looking at a few decks this week and probably into next week as well as we await Bloomborough releasing. So today is Helga Skittish Seer. Whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 4 or greater, you draw a card, gain a life and put a plus counter on it, and then it adds X mana of any one colour, where X is its power. But you can only spend the mana on creature spells of mana value 4 or greater, or creatures with X in their casting cost. So basically what we want to be doing with this commander is playing big creatures with it and tapping it down for mana, untapping it and getting combos like that so that we can get a whole heap of mana and play out our entire hand and then replay creatures that refill our hand and just carry on doing obnoxious typical Bant stuff. So I'll just go through the deck list in no particular order, the order in which the types land here. So Kiora, Behemoth Beckoner. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters, we draw a card and we can untap a permanent. Obviously want to be untapping our commander here and getting multiple uses out of that. And there is some power and CMC matters shenanigans in the deck as well, so we want to be looking at power and the mana cost of our creatures. Walking Ballista is part of a combo, the typical combo that we all know about. Obviously this is an X-Spell commander, or an X-Spell creature, so Helga can cast this quite easily, and Helga can also cast the Heliod Suncrown, which it combos with. So anyone who doesn't know, Heliod can give the Walking Ballista lifelink, remove a plus counter from Walking Ballista to deal a lifelink damage to something, we'll gain the life from that, and Heliod will trigger putting a plus counter back onto the Walking Ballista. We do that infinitely for infinite damage on all of our opponents. Pretty typical combo, but it does fit well in this deck with Walking Ballista being an X spell. Spore Assist, there's quite a few 40k cards in the list. This one is Ravenous, so ideally want to be putting 5 mana into X on this, although that would cost 11 mana in total, so maybe not. But it is some land ramp for us on an X spell, which is excellent, so search your library for up to X basic land cards, they go into play tapped. So even if we only put 2 mana into X, it's 5 mana in total, we get a body and a couple of lands into play. We don't want to be relying solely on the mana from our commander, we obviously want to be land ramping as well so that we can get through board wipes and the like. Benevolent Hydra, a typical Hydra that enters with X plus counters on it, but also the relevant part of the abilities here. If 1 or more plus counters will be put on another creature you control, that many +1 are put on there instead. So every time our commander is triggered we get 2 plus counters, and that obviously equates to much more mana being generated much faster, and therefore getting into our combos and our big beefy boys like this much quicker as well. Farmer Cotton, we create X 1/1 halflings and X food tokens when it enters. The food tokens not really that bothered about, although gaining some incremental life from surplus mana can be handy. It's really in here for the 1/1 halflings littering the board and being able to use them as chump blockers as we buy ourselves time to get into a combo or whatever we need to win. Hydroid Krasis, we all know how good this one is. Whenever you cast the spell, gain half of X life and draw half of X cards, rounded down. Worst case scenario, you play it for cheap and then it enters and gains more plus counters from some of the other creatures that we have. It is a flying trampler, so very good creature to swing in at planeswalkers and the like. And speaking of card draw on creatures, Gadwick the Wizard, we just straight up draw X cards with this. No real downside to playing it. Whenever you cast a blue spell as well, tap a target non-land permanent an opponent controls. So that's just a bit of bonus text at the bottom. It's really in here to be a mana sink for our commander and refill our hand as we combo off. Jilanra, another example of mana value and power matters on a creature. So this one cares about mana value 6 or greater, you draw a card whenever we use this mana to cast any spell, not just creatures. Lifeblood Hydra, yet more card advantage on an X spell, is delayed and it might dissuade our opponents from wiping the board, but when it does die, gain life and draw cards equal to its power. Otherwise it's just a big dumb trampler, so we can swing in all day with that and force our opponents to either kill it so that it'll stop hitting them, or take potentially lethal damage to it. Rundai Behemoth Caller, whenever you cast a creature spell with, again, mana value 5 or greater this time, it enters with an additional plus counter on it where X is its mana value -4, so particularly good for the big creatures Obviously 5 minus 4 means that the 5 mana value creatures are always going to enter with at least 1 plus counter on them. And there is a little bit of a plus counter sub-theme, as you've no doubt worked out. Then the creatures with 3 or more plus counters on them have haste, so there's some benefit to be had there with the big creatures that come in. Maybe we can swing in with them straight away. More mana dorks than I would normally include, but there are some mana value matters mana dorks apparently, so here's another one in Troyan Gutsy Explorer. And this one cares about X spells as well. Worst case scenario, we can just loot consistently with it. Another Tyrannid where we want X to be 5, which will cost us 5, 6, 7, 8 mana in total to get 2 copies of it. Then it will be sacrifice it to have creatures with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until the end of the turn. Mainly in here to protect our commander, although there are lots of other creatures that care about plus counters, as we've already seen. Ancestral Statue is part of a combo piece. It can enter and bounce itself. We'll go over the combos a bit later. Clay Champion, another example of an X spell, gets 3 counters on it for every 2 green mana spent to cast it, and for every 2 white mana spent to cast it you get a plus counter on each of up to 2 other creatures, so we can buff our commander up with that. Sink as much mana as we like into this one as well. It's not just 2 green and 2 white or any combination of those. We can do it for as long as we like, so we could put a bunch of white mana from our commander into this and distribute plus counters wherever that's relevant. Foundation Breaker, a means of artifact or enchantment removal. Noteworthy that with the evoke cost it will only cost 2 mana, and whilst we will have to sacrifice it, it will still trigger our commander because it is still a 4 CMC spell even though we only paid 2 mana to cast it. Cross and Drover cares about creatures with mana value 6 or greater. Gonna make them cost 2 less, so that is going to really help us out with some of the bigger creatures with the bigger mana values that we have in the deck, which we're just around the corner from covering, I imagine. Master Biomancer, one of those creatures that cares about plus counters and giving other creatures plus counters when they enter. So if we have this in play and we have a means of distributing counters like something from a Heliod, then it might be an idea to pile a decent number of plus counters on this so that all of our other creatures enter with plus counters equal to the power of Master Biomancer. Solemn Simulacrum is Solemn Simulacrum and triggers our commander. Tempest Heart is a modal spell, so it can be a loot for 2 at instant speed for 2 mana, or it can sit around and wait for mana value 5 or greater to start putting plus counters on itself, and it will get enough to be relevant eventually because it is a trample creature. Thunderous Snapper, mana value 5, draw a card. Venser Shaper Savant is another example of the, the Ancestral Statue. So once again enters and bounces itself. 2 creatures that pretty much have the same ability for our purposes, and again we'll go over the combo later on. Witch Enchanter is a land, I think it's a Bolt land, yeah. I'd probably play this even if it was a tap land, but we can get this in untapped if we're desperate. Pretty much a Reclamation Sage on a 4 mana body, so we obviously want 4 mana and above creatures to play into our Helga. Chakram Retriever is the final piece of the combo that I keep referencing, so I suppose we'll go over it now. Whenever you cast a creature spell during your turn, untap a target creature. So we would have the 5 mana Chakram Retriever in play, which hopefully our commander will easily be able to cast. Then it's a choice of either going for Venser Shaper Savant into that, which will further buff our commander and trigger the Chakram Retriever to untap our commander. We can do that with either Venser or the Ancestral Statue. And that equates to infinite life, infinite mana for creatures, and infinite card draw as well. So we don't have Laboratory Maniac or Thoracle or anything like that in the deck, but we can draw a whole heap of cards to set up other combos, such as the Walking Ballista and Heliod combo, for instance. Gandalf cares about mana value 5 or greater yet again. Whenever you cast any spell, not just creatures, mana value 5 or greater, each opponent reveals the top card of your library, and if any of those cards share a card type, then we can copy that spell and choose new targets for the copy. So if you're looking to build this deck, not really ideal, I've just gone with something a little bit more unique in the whole mana value and power matters thing. This is going to have certainly a random element to it, but I think it can be a fun creature and should be easy enough to get in with our commander as well, with it likely generating so much mana. Railway Brawler is plus counters, so other creatures, including tokens, enter with plus counters on them where X is their power. So if Gandalf were to enter, for instance, it would enter with 5 plus counters on it. And then if you have any counters doubling stuff, then obviously it'll get even more. But a similar card to the mutant that we saw previously, the Master Biomancer. Thrick's Sudden Storm makes our mana value 5 or greater creatures not only cost 1 less, but makes them uncounterable as well. And of course, the bigger the creature spell, the more likely that we don't want it to be countered, because it's probably going to be a very powerful effect. Flash on this as well, so we can get this in just before our turn, and then start going off with some of the big creatures that we're about to start looking at, such as a Consecrated Sphinx. If we can't rely on Helga for whatever reason, maybe it's taken out of the game, can't rely on it to draw a bunch of cards, then Consecrated Sphinx is a card drawing machine on 1 card. It'll just sit there and draw you your entire deck until your opponents decide to actually do something about it. A new one that I haven't been able to play yet, although I've put it in a few decks, Disciple of Freyalise. It is a Bolt land as well. I don't think you're really advised to count it towards your land count here, but I use the MDFC lands as part of my mana base so that we can fit more effects like this in. When it enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice another creature, and if you do, you gain X life, draw X cards, where X is the creature's power. We want to make lots of big creatures, and if we have a surplus of big creatures, which we may well do, then it's likely that we'll want to refill our hand, especially if we've just comboed off with Helga, and this is the type of card that is going to allow us to draw into even more cards and just carry on being obnoxious towards our opponents. Hamza was one of the last minute additions to the deck, although I think it's good enough with the plus counter sub-theme that we can have multiple plus counters across multiple creatures and then have these said creature spells cost 1 less for each creature with a plus counter on it that we control. So for instance, that might help us with something like the Ancestral Statue, because this would be free. By the time we're comboing off with this, I don't think we'll really need it to be free, but it's just something to bear in mind with something like the Hamza Guardian of Arashin. Kogla the Titan Ape enters the battlefield and fights a creature you don't control. This is a good means of removal on a big creature that we should be able to play quite easily with the massive amounts of mana that our commander generates. It can also remove artifacts and enchantments when it swings in as well, so if we have haste on it from that previous 3 mana dork that I can't remember the name of, then it can swing in straight away and deal a bunch of damage, as well as removing even more stuff. As for the bouncing of humans, I don't know if we have too many humans in the deck. I'll have a quick count now. Yeah, the only humans I'm seeing here are the Witch Enchanter, so maybe we're desperate to get another land down. We could bounce its hand and then play it as a land, or just replay it, of course, and blow something up. Venser, if we decide we want to bounce that back to hand so that we can start countering spells with it instead, then we can do that also. And then the other human was Gadrick the Wizard, bounce it back to hand, draw a bunch more cards again. Suppose that would be of some use with the Kogla, but really not in here for the 2 mana ability. It's in here for the removal and the big smashy smash. Prime Speaker Zagana, I've been looking at some of the ideas that people have had with the Helga lists, and surprisingly few of them have gone for the Prime Speaker Zagana. It's noteworthy that the commander only makes 1 mana at a time, 1 colour of mana at a time, so you might have to put some of your land mana into Prime Speaker Zagana, but the amount of power and toughness that this thing is likely to enter with is absolutely huge and will refill your hand and then some. So once again, another means of refilling the hand and continuing to combo off when we do eventually get to do that. And also it cares about plus counters, so it goes very nicely with that sub-theme. Drogskull Reaver is a massive pet card of mine, and I never get to play it because there's very few decks it'll fit into, but our commander does incrementally gain little bits of life, so every time it does that, we will draw a card off the Drogskull Reaver. And then it does enable itself as well, goes very nicely with Heliod, piling plus counters onto it. Double Strike and Lifelink. Flying will give it evasion, so it's likely that you're going to be able to swing in for a decent amount of damage with this, and you will draw 2 cards every time you land damage with Drogskull Reaver, which will be twice a turn whenever you attack. Nyxbloom Ancient, an obvious one, it trebles the amount of mana that you produce whenever you tap any permanent, so that includes our commander. Our commander is a tap ability, so instead of generating the 7 mana that Helga might generate, it will instead generate 21 mana. So on to the sorceries now. I imagine they're going to be pretty boring, but Nature's Law, 3 visits, Cultivate, yeah, pretty generic land ramp here. There's a slightly interesting one, a Damning Verdict, destroy all creatures with no counters on them, so the better you can spread your counters around your different creatures for cards like Damning Verdict and Hamza, the better it'll be. Traverse the Outlands is a good land ramp spell as well, because if you have multiple big creatures out in play, it's not as likely that they'll be able to shoot the big spell in response and then fizzle your Traverse the Outlands. So our commander's going to be pretty big, and it's going to be making big creatures as well. So we might as well take advantage and get a load of land ramp and await the board wipe so that we can rebuild after that. A Farewell. I don't think we particularly care about the graveyard. I only tend to run Farewell in decks where we don't care about the graveyard because, well, we don't have to exile the graveyard. We do have to get rid of all the creatures on board most likely, and if they're exiled, we're not going to be reanimating them, are we? So Farewell, a really, really good Wrath, and one that is likely going to completely reset the board most of the time. Rishkar's Expertise goes along with the Power Matters stuff that we've got going on. We want to refill our hand constantly, like I keep saying, and the fact that you get a free mana value 5 or less card cast into the Rishkar's Expertise is excellent, because you do actually cast the spell. So all those things we were looking at previously that care about mana value 5 or greater, well, if we go for a 5-costed spell with this, which we likely will because we want to make the most of our mana on that front, then Rishkar's Expertise is going to help us trigger even more shenanigans that are already on the board. So Rishkar's Expertise goes from good to even better, apparently. Some instants now, so an Offer You Can't Refuse, an excellent counter spell. Swords to Plowshares is Swords to Plowshares. I mean, this is, yeah, pretty typical stuff here. I think the most interesting cards are in the creature section. Sink into Stupor is a good new one. I think I have played it a few times on the channel already. Once again, this is a bolt land, so can play it as a land if we want to. But if we already have a decent amount of mana and we can skip on the land drop, then return a spell or a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. A superb piece of control magic, and one that could arguably go in every single blue deck. Return of the Wild Speaker, similar to the Rishkar's Expertise. The fact that it's an instant is excellent. You can set yourself up for the next turn. Don't think we're ever going to be making use of the overrun effect. We've got minimal humans in the deck as we saw previously, and maybe once in a blue moon we'll want to go wide and get some extra damage through to make sure that that happens, but this is really in here for the card draw. And then some rocks are pretty generic as well. Mana Crypt and Soul Ring were mainly looking at land ramp. Ozolith is going to take all the plus counters from the commander when it inevitably is removed from play. And it is a May ability where we get to move them back on, so we'll likely be holding on to all the plus counters, waiting for our commander to come back into play and then throwing them on there straight away, so that we're pretty much back where we started then. Lightning Greaves protects our commander and gives it haste so that we can tap it down for mana straight away. The other Ozolith, this is the Shattered Spire, doubles up the number of plus counters that we have, and also we can put a plus counter on a creature, so this will actually be 2 plus counters for 2 mana. So if you're looking to play on curve here, you could go for this on turn 2, the commander on turn 3, tap this down to put a couple of plus counters on the commander on turn 4, and then you'll have your commander generating 3 mana, and then you'll have 2 left over from the 3rd and 4th land, so 5 mana in total to get down a beefy creature on turn 4. Failing the putting a plus counter or 2 plus counters on a creature ability, it is just going to sit there and double up the number of plus counters that you get from incremental effects like that, so worth having for that alone, but don't shy away from the activated ability here because that can pile up plus counters really quickly and help spread them around from effects that care about such things. And I always forget it has cycling as well for some reason. This has cycling. I don't know why it needed that, but hey, even better. Swiftfoot Boots, an obvious one, protection and haste. 1000 Year Elixir is pseudo haste for the tap abilities as well, and comes with the added benefit of untapping Helga so that we can tap for even more mana. The Great Henge goes with our plus counter sub-theme, and if we get creatures into play that are big enough, then it's going to come down for free. 2 green mana to cast, and then it taps for 2 green mana straight away, and from that point on, all of our non-token creatures, which is the vast majority of them, I think it's all of them actually, are non-token. will enter with a plus counter and draw us a card. Up the beanstalk, haven't seen some mana value 5 matters stuff in a while, but here it is again. Draws when it enters regardless, and then continues to draw us cards the longer it stays in play. Elemental Bond, I think I had Garruk's Uprising in here at first, simply to give the big stuff trample, but once I was looking through the actual creatures that I'd ended up with, I think quite a lot of them have base power and toughness of 3, or at least base power of 3 is what we care about with this enchantment. So yeah, seeing a reasonable amount of creatures that have 3 power as opposed to 4, and I thought we'd get a lot more triggers on a 3 mana enchantment like Elemental Bond as opposed to the Garruk's Uprising. If we have a consistent number of creatures that are entering with 4 power, then it's worth trading this out for Garruk's Uprising for the trample alone, but I'll have to play test it and see how we do there. Argument to be made while I'm here actually to talk about the Tribute to the World Tree. That's triple green, and in a 3 colour deck, I wasn't confident that we'd be able to get it down too consistently on turn 3, but Tribute to the World Tree does add to the plus counter theme of the deck, and it also draws us cards same as Elemental Bond, so yeah, again, playtesting to be done. Maybe this could be replaced with either the Garruk's Uprising or the Tribute to the World Tree. Intruder Alarm, going to make it really easy to get multiple activations on your commander and make a boatload of mana of varying colours, which could be important. Problem with this one is that it does untap all creatures you control, so I had an idea of having some flash in the deck, like a Chromatic Orrery or the Leyline of Anticipation alongside something like Intruder Alarm, so that our commander can make a load of mana and then throw creatures into play at instant speed. Decided to give up on that because there's just not enough deck slots, and might give up on Intruder Alarm as well, even though we can go off really quickly with it. It all depends on how often I feel as though this is benefiting our opponents as much as it's benefiting us, because like I said, it does untap all of our opponents' things as well. Smothering Tithe, it's a white deck, so it's likely that you're going to have Smothering Tithe in here. And that reminds me actually, we don't have Esper Sentinel in the deck, which is really good with plus counters because Esper Sentinel cares about power. Someone asked me recently if I put Esper Sentinel in every single white deck, and well, there's an argument to be made for that, but apparently I don't because it's not in here. Mirari's Wake gives us a further boost to our mana and a further boost to power and toughness as well. This is particularly good to get off the back of Arishkar's Expertise, which I did manage to do in a game on the channel recently. Can't remember what it was, but yeah, that's maximum value there. We'll be able to untap all of our lands and make a degenerate amount of mana with the Mirari's Wake. Mana Reflection, same as the Nyxbloom Ancient, cares about permanents being tapped. This is twice as much mana instead, but it is on a permanent that's going to be a bit more difficult to get rid of. So our commander tapping for a huge amount of mana with the Mana Reflection. Then the lands I can't imagine are all that interesting either. Alchemist's Refuge is a hangback from what I was saying previously about being able to untap with Intruder Alarm and then play spells at instant speed. So wait until your turn is about to begin and then activate this. You can play spells at instant speed and consistently untap and re-tap the Helga. Boseiju, removal on a land. A Ganjo, same thing. I think we've got the whole Bant cycle of those in here actually. Otawara must be in here as well. Gaia's Cradle, I'm not sure if Gaia's Cradle is necessarily worth having in here, because we're not exactly trying to litter the board with tokens off an Avenger of Zendikar or something like that. I think we'll have enough creatures in play to make it tap for, even if it's just a couple of mana here and there, it's probably still worth it. But it's a creature-based deck, so thought I would give Gaia's Cradle a whirl in this list, but there's always the risk that it will tap for no mana after the board has been wiped. Gavany Township, a means of spreading plus counters around the board for the various effects that care about having multiple creatures with multiple plus counters on them. The Surveil lands are excellent, so try to include them in pretty much all my multicolour lists. Manamo is an interesting one, untap a legendary permanent, so very low cost for that, and we can untap the commander and get multiple activations with that, as we've mentioned plenty of times already. And there is the Otawara from that cycle. And other than that, yeah, Reliquary Tower, we're going to have a lot of cards in hand, and an infinite hand size is going to be of some use to us, I think. I don't think, though, that we have many other interesting lands there. So there we are, that is the deck. So why don't we, just for some fun, we'll go to the playtesting. Alright, so here in the opening hand, we don't have, or actually we do have all of our colours thanks to Witch Enchanter being a bolt land, so yeah, it's not an incredible opening hand, but we can get triple blue for a Gadwick, so yeah, I think we try this. We draw on turn 1 and Fierce Guardianship, the card that everyone just loves to see. So we can actually, is there any point going for a turn 1 Kiora? I don't think there is. I think we just go for a land on turn 1 and then draw into Command Tower on turn 2. And now that we know that we're getting down our commander next turn, we can go for the Mana Crypt and get down the Kiora. Could always untap the Mana Crypt with that. Can we untap lands? Yeah, we can untap lands with Kiora as well, which could be useful. So I suppose if we'd gone for this on turn 1, we could have had a turn 2 commander, because we could have untapped the Command Tower, although we didn't know what land we were drawing into, in all fairness. Well worth looking at though. So then to turn 3 we draw into a combo piece, Inventor. So just get a green mana down, get down our commander and hope that no one removes it. Turn 4 is another land, so just throw that in, we're not going to bother fetching things. And how much mana do we have available to us here? It would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8, because the Kiora would untap it. I suppose we could untap the Mana Crypt instead to gain more mana. I'm just thinking of going for an early Gadwick the Wizard here. So that would be 6 into X if we untap the Mana Crypt. And the converted mana cost does change on the stack, so it's 3 in your hand, 3 in your library, everywhere else. But when it's on the stack with X in the casting cost, the mana value does change. So I'm guessing, I'm hoping that it will still trigger the Helga and we'll get a plus counter here. I think I'm right in saying that. So we'll add the first plus counter to Helga. What was it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So we draw 6 cards with the Gadwick the Wizard. And we are tapped out here, so we'd have to go down to hand size. Let's just get rid of some random stuff here. Right, so now we've got the Ozolith and a means of dumping a lot of plus counters on Helga, which means that we can generate a bunch of mana with it, and something like a Mana Reflection should be able to protect the board nicely with Fierce Guardianship as well. Let's just assume that we've used that already. So then it's our next turn, the Alchemist Refuge. So we can go 2 4 mana and then have 3 lands held up after a Mana Reflection. This assumes that the Kiora is still in play, of course, but we could always have chump blocked with a Gadwick to keep it in play. So now there's 6 mana on the lands. Helga only triggers on creatures with mana value 4 or greater, so this taps for 4 mana because it cares about power. So I suppose if we're just kind of in setup mode, I don't think I drew a card off the Helga before actually. I need to remember to draw a card off casting the Gadwick the Wizard. But anyway, we can tap down 1 land for the Ozolith. Maybe for the fun of it, tap down another land to put another couple of plus counters onto the Helga. So it will now tap for 8 mana instead. And that means that we can go for the Witch Enchanter by turn 5. There's probably a mana rock that we can blow up or something. That will draw us a card with the Helga. And then we've just made a bunch of white mana with Helga, so we'll have to tap down a couple of blue with the final land. And that is Venser, so maybe we just play it and bounce it straight back to hand. Or we could, in this instance, bounce back the Gadwick is probably a better idea. Draw a card from the Venser being cast. And you can see already by turn 5 that we're already starting to look really, really good from our opponent's perspectives. Let's have one more turn here. And once again, this is assuming that all our stuff stays intact. Let's just assume that Kiora's gone down for the sake of being at least slightly honest. So draw into a Railway Brawler. I think we're going to have to decide on how much mana we're going to make with Helga. I think it has to be blue mana because we've got big blue spells in hand. So this is 6 mana at the moment, meaning it's 12 from the Mana Reflection. We'll make a land, then we can tap Mana Crypt down for 4 mana, and then 2 mana from this means that we've got 1 floating, play the Railway Brawler. 2 more plus counters on our commander. Draw a card. I think we did just draw a card, didn't we? And this is before we've tapped down the Helga, so then we need to decide if we want to add more counters to it with the Ozolith or not. We'd make 16 mana with Helga at the moment. 20 if we put the counters on it, so maybe sometimes it's best to hold on to mana from the lands, because we don't know what we're about to draw into with Gadwick in this instance. Noteworthy that with Skyshroud Claim, we are going to get 2 untapped lands, and that's effectively free with the mana reflection. So let's just go like that, and then I'm not too strict with the lands that I go after here, because we're just doing this for the fun of it. But let's assume that I go for a couple of dual lands there. Make sure to shuffle. So we've effectively got some lands in for free there, and yeah, let's just go for the extra plus counters onto the Helga. So now it is a 10 powered creature, that is 20 blue mana in this instance. So do we want a Consecrated Sphinx, or is that a bit win more? Let's just go for it here, meaning that we've got 14 mana remaining. So that is 11 mana that we can put into X. Yeah, let's just go for the 11 mana. Or I suppose before we decide that, we need to draw a card from the Consecrated Sphinx entering. There is a Tempest Heart that can have plus counters to itself. So we'll go for the 11 mana into Gadwick. These enter with plus counters equal to their power as well, thanks to the railway thing. I put too many counters on there, but you get the gist. So now we've still got lands untapped. The Sol Ring is going to tap for 4 mana. Have we made a land this turn? I imagine we have, because we've got the Gaia's Cradle there, so we have to be wary of that if we're about to draw a bunch of cards. We could potentially hold off on land drops in case we get into something like Gaia's Cradle. But Gadwick would enter with 3 counters on it. I'm just trying to keep track of these because we've just seen a Rishkar's Expertise. So Sol Ring pays for itself. We'll just go like that for a Sol Ring. Then it's 4 mana, 2 mana, and that is a Rishkar's Expertise. So what's the biggest power here? Must be the 8 powered Consecrated Sphinx. So we draw 8 cards and get a free spell. Now the free spells don't really help with the X spells, but we could go for something like Traverse the Outlands to get even more lands into play, because I imagine that if we haven't seen a board wipe here, then it is only a matter of time, so might be best land ramping while we can. Failing that, we could go for something like the Mirari's Wake I said before, can double up your lands. If you feel as though you need to draw even more cards, then a Thunderous Snapper. I mean, let's just do that for the fun of it. Mana value 5 or greater, and actually we've only got 2 mana available anyway, or 4 mana. But yeah, I mean, we could just throw a big spell like that down. So get the card draw off that from our commander, card draw off that as well. 2 plus counters, 2 plus counters. And by turn 6, we've got a cartload of cards in hand, really powerful creatures on the board, including a nasty Consecrated Sphinx that could even deal a bunch of damage. Maybe we could have gone for Swiftfoot Boots onto that to deal damage in the air straight away this turn. And our commander is up to 13 plus counters, in no small part thanks to the Ozolith, the Shattered Spire. Now this is without combos, this is without the untapped shenanigans that we've got available to us. We're really getting ahead on cards and creatures into play and all that, becoming a big threat to our opponents by only turn 6 here. Anyway, that is Helga Skittish Seer. I'm hoping that you all enjoyed this informal version of a deck tech. The deck techs that I usually put together, they surprisingly, considering the minimal amount of editing prowess in those videos, they surprisingly take a long time to put together thanks to the script writing and audio recording and all that. So hopefully you all enjoyed this. It's a bit more impromptu and a bit more raw and live, but we get to look at some of the new commanders this way a little bit earlier on the channel. So like I said, hopefully you all enjoyed it. Big thank you to the patrons for their support of the channel. And be sure to let me know if there's any additions that you think I should make to Helga. Are there any combos that I could add? Anything that you've put in your list? I'm tribalkai. Thank you for watching.